motivation and productivity.
In every other human activity, nothing of any consequence happens until an individual wants to act. What he accomplishes depends to a considerable extent on how much and on why he wants to act. That much is obvious. Beyond that point, the nature of human motivation becomes complex and subtle. All men have purposes, and these purposes affect the way they work. This is why there has been such a growing volume of research. Social scientists on the motives of people at work. This research has motives of its own. It began with a wave of humanitarianism in industry and the late Exois. Since World War II, it has been spurred by an interest in increasing productivity. And more recently, the field has attracted students who consider companies and organizations as were the objects of study in their own right. This speech has three main purposes: to draw together the most significant achievements in the study of work motivation, to present a theory that puts most of this research into a single, understandable perspective, and to show the practical implications of all this research and theory for management policy. In presenting the viewpoint of other writers, I have tried to state their ideas as authentically and sympathetically as possible. Even though I may not always agree with them. And above all, I have tried to express their ideas which were often addressed in their original form to a professional audience, in terms that laymen could readily understand. There is so much research in motivation that any attempt to be encyclopedic would easily have stretched the speech into several long, probably boring, volumes. It has been necessary to pick and choose among many valuable studies to determine which should have a place in this book. And I have often had to make an omission regretfully. The selected materials represent, in my best judgment, Either older studies that have lasting significance, or recent material that makes an important contribution to the UN understanding of work motivation. Researchers and theorists have been tracing the many ways in which workers are affected by their managers. There is no longer much doubt that an individual worker's motivation or lack of it is at least partially the result of the actions or attitudes of the people who direct his work. So clear that his motivation is affected by attitudes and actions of his own. Many of which have roots that reach far back into his pre-employment history and even in some cases, into his childhood. It is the continuing interplay of the motivating environment, which is largely a matter of how an enterprise is managed. With the personal motivations of the individual that produces his long-term motivational trends as well as his momentary ups and downs. I will divide it into 3 parts. The first part deals with motivation from the standpoint of the environment. That is, the various kinds of rewards and pressures within which people operate at work. Most studies in this field are concerned specifically with industry and are therefore fairly well known in the literature of management. The second part considers motivation from the standpoint of the individual himself. His needs and purposes and how he acquires them. Most of the studies in this field were done by psychologists. Who were not primarily concerned with industrial applications. And therefore they may not be well known in management circles, even though their implications are very important. In the third part, I attempt to show how the environment and the individual interact, and, more than that, how most of the studies considered in parts 1 and 2 can be integrated by a set of linked ideas that accommodates most of what is presently understood about work motivation. In the final chapters, a number of major managerial problems are analyzed in the light of this theory. Leadership, recruitment, morale, organizational change, and labor unions. Since so much I represents the work and ideas of other men, it is difficult to single out those to whom I am most indebted. Many of the leading students of work motivation are mentioned in